Muy buenas tardes, soy Evaristo Aguilar y quiero darles la bienvenida al segundo encuentro internacional de la Red de Ecología Acústica de México. El sonido y arte e investigadora que trabaja en la intersección del arte, la ciencia y la tecnología. Su investigación y trabajo creativo se enfoca en el registro y difusión de paisajes sonoros de ecosistemas terrestres y acuáticos para informar la conservación, la investigación científica y la participación pública para reconectar a las comunidades con el medio ambiente e inspirar la acción climática. Sus instalaciones sonoras de realidad aumentada se han presentado de Times Square a la Torre Eiffel para COP21 y en organizaciones como el Smithsonian Museum, la UNESCO, Ear to Earth, Streaming Museum, Al Gore Climate Reality y la IUCN. Es profesora de la USC en Australia, donde lidera un portafolio de investigación en ecoacústica y un nuevo programa de sonido, y es presidenta del Australian Forum for Acoustic Ecology. Les recuerdo que pueden realizar sus preguntas a través de la sección de comentarios en nuestro canal de YouTube y al final tendremos un espacio para responderles. Es un gusto recibir a Leah Barclay, quien presentará la conferencia especializada, la conferencia magistral Biosphere Soundscapes, Listening to Changing Ecosystems. Welcome, Leah, to Virtual Mexico. Welcome to the conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today, and congratulations on such a brilliant conference. It's truly inspiring to see the program that's come together, and it's wonderful to see the Mexican Forum for Acoustic Ecology come back to life and all the wonderful activity that's happening in Mexico. So thank you very much for the invitation to be here. As was just in the introduction, I'm going to be talking about the Biosphere Soundscapes project today, and I'm going to give you quite a broad snapshot of what's been happening and how we've adapted some things through COVID this year, and the sort of major focus of our projects in the future, looking at the interdisciplinary possibilities of acoustic ecology. So I am going to screen share, so I'm just going to get my slides ready to go now, and you should be able to all see that okay. So I'm based currently at the University of the Sunshine Coast, not far from the Noosa Biosphere Reserve and the Great Sandy Biosphere Reserve, which is actually where the Biosphere Soundscapes project all started about 8 years ago now. So it's quite exciting to come back to this part of Australia and work on developing the next phase of this project. And I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land which I'm speaking to you from today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and this is part of Gubbi Gubbi country on the Noosa River in the middle of the Noosa Biosphere Reserve. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians. And basically, this project, Biosphere Soundscapes, is all inspired by, I guess, my passion and my interest in acoustic ecology, in the sound of the environment, in the artistic and scientific possibilities of listening. So the foundation of this project was really all about field recording, looking at how we could record the environment and listen from different perspectives, and what we could truly learn about changing ecosystems through their soundscapes. And the most critical element for me in this project is really about listening and engaging the community in listening. This is one of the workshop participants in the Tonle Sap Biosphere Reserve in Cambodia, listening to the sounds beneath the surface of the lake for the first time during a Biosphere Soundscapes workshop. And I'm always inspired by bringing the community into these listening experiences and listening processes through Biosphere Soundscapes, particularly when we can access parts of the environment we don't traditionally have access to, like the sounds beneath the surface of the lake in this example. So for me, it's really about connecting to these ecosystems through sound and really bringing the community into these processes. And I got really involved in the scientific possibilities of environmental sound over the last few years. And I guess one of the things that's really interested me is how important this field of ecoacoustics or bioacoustics is at this stage for really advancing science and helping us to understand climate change better and what's actually happening in ecosystems. You know, when we look at an image like this of the canopy of the Amazon rainforest, it's virtually impossible to know what's happening here. You know, the impacts of climate change are difficult to see visibly in an ecosystem like this. We don't know how many species of birds are living in this environment. We don't know the kind of environmental impacts that are happening here. But if we were to take a snapshot of sound at this exact same ecosystem from the perspective of the canopy, suddenly we're able to reveal the spatial and temporal complexity of that environment. We're suddenly able to understand the kind of species that live there and how they interact. So I've always been really passionate about how much we can learn from sound from a scientific perspective. And we're at this stage now where we can put field recorders, acoustic monitors in these environments and be recording for months and weeks, years on end. There's a fantastic organisation in Australia we work with called Frontier Labs with Biosphere Soundscapes, who create incredibly accessible bioacoustic recorders that we can literally leave in biosphere reserves for years on end, capturing these changing soundscapes and databasing the acoustics of these environments. And there's obviously been some incredible advancements in the last couple of years as well. The Audiomoth is a great example, which has really made this field of acoustic monitoring accessible and affordable for communities across the planet. The Audiomoth is one of the smallest acoustic monitors that's available now, developed by an incredible team out of Oxford. And this runs off 3 AA batteries and a small SD card that you can fit in the palm of your hand, and can again record for months on end in the field. Now, the incredible thing about a device like this is it's about $50 Australian, and it means that suddenly this idea of monitoring through sound is incredibly accessible and affordable for communities in different parts of the planet. And that's really one of the foundations of Biosphere Soundscapes, is looking at how we can make this field engaging, accessible, inclusive, that it's not just scientific research institutions that are able to do long-term acoustic monitoring, but this can actually be driven directly from communities, the communities of biosphere reserves. So Biosphere Soundscapes has always been looking at these interdisciplinary possibilities of acoustic ecology, looking at how we can understand environmental change through sound, but how we can actually develop the technologies and the mechanisms to make this as accessible as possible for local communities. Now, when we think about a biosphere reserve, there's over 600 biosphere reserves across the planet now. And what I'm really passionate about biosphere reserves is that they're designed as these learning laboratories for sustainability. And the whole premise of a biosphere reserve is it's about the conservation of cultural and biological diversity. So the perfect sort of framework to think about acoustic ecology in the environment when we're looking at understanding the social, cultural and ecological context for of our environment through sound. So I'm really interested in this idea of, you know, these local projects that are community embedded, that are driven from a local biosphere reserve, that can then connect through this global network of biosphere reserves with UNESCO. And that's really been how the project has functioned for the last number of years. Now, for me, as a composer and sound artist, one of the I guess, the largest focuses of the project has been creating these immersive experiences with the resulting recordings. And just as a few examples, you know, we've created these immersive performances that allow us to travel to different biosphere reserves across the world through sound, to site-specific performance venues like this geodesic dome on Mooloolaba Beach, a full surround sound dome, which was live streaming aquatic soundscapes from different biosphere reserves. So using live hydrophones, underwater microphones, and live mixing the soundscapes of biosphere reserves, to augmented reality sound walks. So creating these sound walks in biosphere reserves and along different ecosystems, where I'm taking that database of sound recordings and GPS locating them in the environment and making them accessible for the community. So many of the creative outcomes from Biosphere Soundscapes have very much been about, instead of the sounds just living on a database used for biodiversity monitoring, how can they become accessible and engaging for the local community, and how can then those sounds travel in a way to different locations, whether that be conferences or events, to bring a wider attention and awareness to what's happening in these ecosystems. As an example of that, the Central Amazon Biosphere Reserve in Brazil has been a big focus for Biosphere Soundscapes, and some of my earliest spatial field recordings were done in the Central Amazon, where we were really exploring the possibilities of, I guess, large-scale creative representations of biosphere reserves. And so as an example of this, you know, for Climate Week New York City in 2015, we actually brought the sounds of the Central Amazon Biosphere Reserve to New York City and mapped that biosphere reserve over Times Square. So you could download the app, walk around Times Square and be immersed in the sounds of the Central Amazon Biosphere Reserve. So this was a total juxtaposition to the multi-sensory, overwhelming soundscapes of Times Square, but it was a way to actually bring that ecosystem to the decision makers who were currently in these meetings. Likewise, for COP21 in Paris, took this one step further, where I took a large database of the recordings that I'd been doing in the Amazon at different transects of the canopy, from basically forest floor to canopy, so those 4 distinctive layers of tropical rainforest vegetation, and mapped those to the 4 platforms of the Eiffel Tower. And again, this was about bringing the Biosphere Reserve to decision makers who are currently having these conversations, talking about the future of the Amazon rainforest. And this was really an experiment to see how a creative project like this could work in the context of a large-scale international climate conference, and to really measure the kind of engagement that we could generate in the context of a conference like this. And I've always found it very valuable to take these acoustic ecology projects to environmental science conferences and climate conferences to really start that conversation about the value of sound in both monitoring and understanding our environment, but also connecting to these ecosystems at a different level. So Biosphere Soundscapes since the beginning has had various elements to it. And I just wanted to introduce a few of these now and then talk about how some of these have adapted and shifted in the last 2 years, particularly this year. So our key focus of Biosphere Soundscapes has always been hosting residencies. So hosting artists, scientists, and researchers to come together to work with local communities to really connect around issues in that Biosphere Reserve, local questions that want to be resolved about the environment, that we can really bring these different acoustic ecology knowledge systems together and look at different perspectives on listening. The residencies are always fascinating to really see the synchronicities and the difference between artistic and scientific perspectives. And these are generally 10-day immersive processes where we do field recording, workshops, masterclasses, and work directly with the local community. And then generating from those residencies is often a range of creative outcomes. Some of the examples that I just spoke about that are really designed to bring attention and awareness to what's happening in those biosphere reserves. We also host a range of masterclasses and labs for local communities and conservation organisations, so giving local community groups the kind of technology and tools that they need to do acoustic mapping or to run a creative project in the Biosphere Reserve. That has all naturally shifted online this year. A whole range of internships and courses, some additional short courses that are in development at the moment. Community-based research and monitoring, biodiversity monitoring is obviously a very key focus of Biosphere Soundscapes overall. And there's been a whole range of ways that the community-based monitoring has unfolded, from, you know, a smaller scale project using 20 Audiomoths in a biosphere reserve to monitor a particular species of bat, so very specific monitoring, to, you know, large scale ecoacoustic monitoring that's looking at measuring the spatial and temporal complexities of climate change. So there's various elements of that unfolding in different parts of the world at the moment through the Biosphere Soundscapes project. And this is all feeding into a global sound map, which has been in development for several years and is in the process of launching the first phase of it next year, which I'm going to talk about in a moment as well. And to this final element of the project, which is really all about Biosphere Reserve designations and also potentially policy change, how we can actually use sound as a tool to bring attention and awareness to particular issues in that Biosphere Reserve, whether that be illegal logging or protecting a particular area because of the presence or absence of a particular species that's there. So that has become a really core part of many of the conversations we're having with Biosphere Reserves at the moment. And this idea of designations has been an unintentional outcome, but because of some of the areas that we've worked with and the projects that have evolved from the community there, it's actually become a catalyst for other regions to apply to become a Biosphere Reserve and actually use soundscapes as part of their application process. And we've been working with UNESCO to essentially develop mechanisms where we can do ongoing measurement of Biosphere Reserves through sound as part of the reporting process as well, which is a very exciting outcome which will be unfolding in the next few years. So I just want to play a brief video to give you a sense of the Noosa Biosphere Reserve now, where the project all started.
And you just look at it and take it all in, and when you take it all in, you're moving on it very, lightly treading and not trying to disturb it, anything, just going in and picking out sort of what you need, you know what I mean? You sort of gain a great deal of respect.
So that just gives you a snapshot of the Noosa Biosphere Reserve to get a sense of exploring the cultural and biological diversity of the Biosphere Reserve through sound, both above and below the water as well. Now, just to give you a snapshot of one of the, I guess, core focuses of the project in the last few years has been the development of the Biome project, a collaboration with many organisations. You can see there in particular Locus Sonus and SoundCamp, where we're looking at developing a live streaming network of nodes in different biosphere reserves across the planet. So we've had a series of pilot locations from 2017 to 2020, which has basically been looking at testing different approaches to the live streaming network and the kind of technology that we're using to stream. And this is now evolving into a series of permanent live streams. And these live streams are both, for scientific monitoring and community engagement, but also, global accessibility to these biosphere reserves in real time as well, that you can tune in from anywhere on the planet and really connect to these soundscapes of changing biosphere reserves. As an example, we've worked for several years now with SoundCamp in London on the project REA, and REA was particularly profound this year. So in May, on International Dawn Chorus Day, the idea is a 24-hour radio broadcast following sunrise around the entire planet. So jumping from microphone to microphone, streaming the sounds of dawn. Many of these locations were in biosphere reserves, many of the pilot locations I just mentioned there. And this was quite a profound experience with hundreds of open microphones across the planet in May, when so much of the world was in lockdown due to the COVID restrictions. So this unique moment in time where there were less planes in the sky, less ships in the ocean, less cars on the road, listening to the planet in a way that it hadn't been heard for many years. Yet there was still this distinctive tension in many of the streams. And this was, part of a series of experiments this year through Biosphere Soundscapes we've been working on to really shift and adapt some of our practices into virtual environments. We've always had a really strong focus on virtual engagement, whether that be workshops or online sound mapping, but really looking at ways that our residency processes, so these kind of immersive labs that I was mentioning before, some familiar faces in this image who are presenting during the conference who were very involved in our first Biosphere Soundscapes residency in the Siancam Biosphere Reserve in Mexico in 2015, which was a real highlight residency for Biosphere Soundscapes, and, a really incredible opportunity to bring a group of people together in a Biosphere Reserve. So we've been exploring how do we create that experience of a residency in online environments as well. And so our biggest focus this year, and certainly moving into the next 2 years, has been these virtual collaborations. So setting up online conversations and residencies, short courses, obviously the Biome project that I mentioned, that open microphone network, extending that pilot research into permanent installations with the live sound map, remote monitoring. So we've been investing further time in research and development for these long-term monitoring sites, and how we can actually package these kits up, send them to Biosphere Reserves with the workshop instructions, and have communities on the ground actually facilitating those. And then, as I mentioned earlier, our global sound map development, which has been an ongoing project since the start of Biosphere Soundscapes. This will definitely be launching in 2021 in collaboration with UNESCO, and this is scheduled to launch during the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO MAB program and the World Network for Biosphere Reserves. So just an example of one version of the community map. This is developed in collaboration with Artsfront in Australia, where you can kind of zoom in and get information and images about the sound recording, and you can add as much data as you like. This will be an open community platform as well that anyone can contribute to. So obviously, Biosphere Soundscapes has a focus on monitoring specific species, but then we've also been really interested in exploring the potential of what's happening through acoustics in the environment and really understanding some of the more hidden elements of our acoustic ecology, and really focused on research in that area as well. You know, as an example, the acoustic camouflage research that's evolved around particular species of moths, you know, developing a different type of fur on their wings where they can actually protect themselves from hunting microbats, which is fascinating element of acoustics research, to one of our main collaborators at the moment, Monica Gagliano, and her work around plant bioacoustics. So we've been working quite a lot together on different projects looking at the acoustic ecology in soil and the acoustic ecology of plants. So that's been a very fascinating element of this acoustics research recently, to, you know, something very specific such as the way sound actually transmits through a spider web. So we're really looking at that micro and macro level of acoustic ecology in the environment. Now, that short video I showed earlier, you know, I'm sure there were some very familiar sounds in there, the sounds of humpback whales and dolphins in aquatic environments. Sorry, I'm just checking the time. Excellent. And I'm sure that when you look at an image like this, you're, you know, you have that sense of it's quite a peaceful and relaxing environment. But, you know, when we're talking about the soundscapes beneath the surface of a lake in a biosphere reserve, you know, that couldn't be further from the truth. These are acoustic environments filled with sound. So a big focus of Biosphere Reserve, or Biosphere Soundscapes, has been really exploring those aquatic environments in biosphere reserves, using hydrophones, underwater microphones to connect to those sounds beneath the surface and allow communities access to this world they don't traditionally think about. Now, when we talk about, you know, the impacts of climate change, we can readily see those impacts in a terrestrial environment. Yet when we look at the surface of a lake, we really have no idea what's happening beneath the surface. So hydrophones give us access to this world that we can't visibly access, but it's also incredibly rich information about biodiversity, particularly when some of the traditional methods that are used to monitor freshwater biodiversity in particular are very invasive. So one of my main collaborators on this research, Dr. Simon Linke, always says these classic methods don't reflect reality. But what we're trying to monitor, you know, the presence and absence of particular species, when we talk about aquatic bioacoustics, you know, all of these species that we're trying to monitor, or many of them I should say, make sound, you know, very distinctive sounds. Just as a very quick example, a black drumfish. This is a spangled perch. And a catfish. And then all of these aquatic insects make very distinctive sounds as well. I'm going to stop that one there. So we can monitor these river systems, lakes, freshwater ecosystems quite accessibly with hydrophones now. And we can capture the same quality of acoustic data as one of the very advanced, you know, hydrophone systems that may have cost $20,000 just a few years ago, on something the size of a Raspberry Pi Zero that we can literally fit in the palm of our hands. So it's quite an exciting time for acoustic monitoring when this technology has become so accessible and affordable and so easy to use for local community use. This is one of the examples of our river listening streaming kits. There's a simplified example here, which is just a mono hydrophone, which will be many of the kind of devices that are used as part of the biome network. And we're also investing quite a bit of time in building terrestrial microphones as well. So taking a standard binaural microphone here, 3D printing ears, actually hand making the microphones themselves and building them into these streaming kits. Likewise, you know, we invest a lot of time in engaging young people in the community into this process and making sure this technology is as accessible as possible to engage the next generation in acoustic ecology. And that's always been something that I've been really passionate about with this project, you know, whether we are doing quite experimental sound art or, you know, a new form of really pushing the boundaries of what's possible scientifically, it's been really important for me to make sure that there's always pathways through Biosphere Soundscapes for young people to engage, to really understand what's happening in the environment through sound and have access to these new technologies. So just to finish off with, I just wanted to mention that the way that the research is shifting at the moment, and several of our research projects that are unfolding for next year have this very strong focus on shifting that core of Biosphere Soundscapes away from acoustic ecology engagement and acoustic monitoring to actually looking at acoustic regeneration and restoration through sound. So looking at the role that sound plays in the environment as a regeneration tool, whether that's on coral reefs. We've got various projects happening on the Great Barrier Reef at the moment, to terrestrial environments, looking at the role of sound in regeneration initiatives, to initiatives looking at seaweed farming, for example. And this coincides with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which kicks off next year. And as I mentioned, the 50th anniversary of UNESCO Biosphere Reserves. So if anyone is interested in getting involved, there's plenty of ways to connect. Feel free to send me an email. You can connect with Biosphere Soundscapes online. We regularly post content on Twitter and Facebook. That's the easiest way to connect with what's happening, or the website. And there'll be various ways to get involved virtually next year. And just as one final thing, if you want to see a short documentary on Biosphere Soundscapes that UNESCO kindly produced this year, it's available on UNESCO's Instagram on their IGTV. So you can follow UNESCO and the Man in the Biosphere program, and that will connect you with their 50th anniversary events for next year as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leah, for this wonderful presentation. It is really a huge honor for us to have you here in this conference in Mexico. After we met 3 years ago now at the University of Hull at the Sound and Environment Conference. We have a couple of questions already for you that I like to pass to you. And the first one is, how have you made available some of the technology when working with remote and often economically disadvantaged, empowered communities? If this is possible, how will we avoid globalizing them?
Yeah, look, great question. I mean, I guess Biosphere Soundscapes has evolved in a way that it's been step by step, and every project operating in quite a different way. So I've always made it a point that we never wanted to run a research project where we, you know, went into a community without permission or an invitation and did a whole bunch of recording and got the community excited about technology and then left. I've always made it a point that any biosphere reserve we work with, it's an invitation. It's the community that really wants us there to do the project, and that there's people on the ground who are interested in kind of continuing the work of the project, and that if we're applying for a grant, or if the project's sponsored, or if we're able to provide the technology, that there's always a way that technology can be left with the community, so that we'd never want to, you know, run these workshops and then leave, basically. And that's why I think building the technology has also become a really core part of some of the workshops as well, whether that's building hydrophones or building the streaming kits, so that it's not just leaving the technology there, but it's empowering the community to kind of continue that process of building the technologies and, you know, having that kind of scaled up within the community as well. I mean, there's always risk with this kind of work. So it's just been about being, I guess, as responsive and as possible to the needs of the community, and really being guided by the communities to make sure that, that technology is going to be relevant, and that we're sort of approaching it in the most ethical way possible in terms of how the project is unfolding. So while there's, I guess, structures and frameworks for Biosphere Soundscapes, it's always been very adaptable and responsive to whatever Biosphere Reserve we've been working with. And, much of the content that's been produced in some of the Biosphere Reserves we work with isn't available publicly online either, because the communities have chosen to, keep that data for a scientific research paper or for a project purely within that community. So it's always just about listening and being responsive and adaptable.
Thank you, Leah. And also, congratulations for your amazing project. Can anyone contribute to the sound map?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Biosphere Open Microphone Network, anyone can get involved in that. I mean, the Sound Camp have some brilliant tools that can literally provide anyone in the world with the capacity to stream and build the stream boxes. But for the Biome project, obviously, there's a proposal that it needs to be associated with a Biosphere Reserve. So that's obviously one element of it, but we can provide the support to, set up the right technology and get all of that working. And yeah, anyone that, in terms of the global sound map for Biosphere Soundscapes, once the new version of that launches as part of the 50th anniversary next year, anyone will be able to contribute to that, yes.
And Eric Leonardson says, thank you so much for another impressive presentation, Leah.
Thank you, Eric.
And precisely, Eric and you were at England, and it was very inspiration from both of you. And I think it's really something that, kick the intention to make this Acoustic Ecology network in Mexico. So thank you very much for your presentation. And I think we are saying goodbye. And getting ready for our next panel. Thank you very much, Leah, for sharing.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me, and congratulations again on a brilliant conference. Thank you.
Thank you.